Some choices aren't made in church halls or parlors. They're made in the dirt when you've got nothing left to lose. Ethan Cole stood at that train station with dust in his throat and defeat in his bones, watching a woman in a gray travel dress sit alone on a bench, abandoned like yesterday's news. He was 42, broke, and burying his life one day at a time. She was 38, stranded, and staring at the end of her own story. What happened next would shock a town, save a ranch, and prove that the bravest thing you can do is bet everything on a stranger. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1884 burned across western Kansas like a slow curse, turning the prairie grass brittle and the air thick enough to choke on. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, bleached white by the sun, and the wind carried nothing but the smell of dust and dying things. It was the kind of heat that made men mean and animals stupid, the kind that drove families off their land and left ghost towns in its wake. Ethan Cole knew that heat in his bones. He sat on the wagon bench outside Millridge Station, reins loose in his calloused hands, watching the afternoon train belch black smoke into the merciless sky. The horses stamped and snorted, as miserable as he was. His shirt stuck to his back, soaked through with sweat, and his hat brim cast a shadow that did nothing to cool the fire in his chest. 42 years old, widower, failing rancher. 3 words that summed up everything he'd become. The station platform was nearly empty, just a clerk dozing in the shade, a farmer loading crates, and a woman sitting alone on a weathered bench near the far end. Ethan wouldn't have noticed her at all if it weren't for the stillness. In a world that never stopped moving, she sat like a portrait, hands folded in her lap, back straight, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She wore a gray travel dress, simple but well made, and a small hat pinned to dark hair that was gathered at the nape of her neck. No bags beside her, no one meeting her, no movement except for the occasional blink. Ethan had seen that look before. In the mirror, in the months after Sarah died. It was the look of someone who'd run out of places to go. He turned away, focusing on the supply list crumpled in his pocket. Nails, wire, cornmeal if they had it, flour if the price was right. He needed twice what he could afford and could afford half of what he needed. The math didn't work anymore. It hadn't worked in 2 years. The Double Creek Ranch, his father's land, his grandfather's before that, was dying. Slowly, stubbornly, the way old things die when they refuse to admit they're done. Fences sagging, cattle thin, fields going to seed, the bank breathing down his neck like a wolf that could smell blood. And Ethan, alone in that big empty house, watching it all fall apart. "You getting down or just decorating the wagon?" The voice startled him. He turned to see Walt Grimes, the station master, squinting up at him from the platform, tobacco-stained teeth showing in a grin that had more pity than humor. "Getting down," Ethan muttered, swinging himself to the ground. His boots hit the planks with a hollow thud. "Saw your name on the freight list," Walt said, spitting into the dust. "Not much coming through for you this month." "Ordered what I could pay for." "Smart." Walt nodded toward the station house. "She's inside. 3 crates all told. Light stuff, mostly staples." Ethan nodded his thanks and started toward the building, but Walt's voice stopped him. "You see that woman over there?" Ethan glanced back. The woman on the bench hadn't moved. "Hard to miss her," he said carefully. Walt shook his head, his expression darkening. "Been sitting there since the morning train. Had a ticket to meet some fella in Dodge. Mail order arrangement, if you catch my meaning. He was supposed to be on the noon train to collect her." Ethan frowned. And he sent a messenger instead. Kid delivered a note, took one look at her, and rode off. She read it, folded it up neat as you please, and sat down right there. Hasn't moved since. Something cold settled in Ethan's gut. "What did the note say?" Walt shrugged. "Didn't ask, but I can guess. Same story every time. Man orders a wife, woman shows up, man decides she's not young enough or pretty enough or whatever fool thing he had in his head." He spat again. "She's too old for the games these boys play. Probably 35 if she's a day." Ethan looked at her again. She wasn't young, that much was true, but there was a composure to her, a dignity that made age seem irrelevant. She didn't fidget, didn't weep, didn't beg for attention. She just sat, as if waiting for the world to remember she existed. "What's she gonna do?" Ethan asked quietly. "Don't know. Train back east don't come through till Friday. No hotel in town takes women traveling alone without a man's name on the register." Walt shrugged. "Guess she'll figure it out. They always do." The station master walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, staring at the woman who had nowhere to go. He should have walked into the station house, should have collected his supplies, loaded the wagon, and driven home. He had enough problems without adding someone else's trouble to the pile. But he didn't move, because he knew what it felt like to be stranded, to sit in the wreckage of your own life and wonder if anyone in the world even noticed you were still breathing. Before he could talk himself out of it, Ethan crossed the platform. His boots sounded too loud on the wooden planks. The woman didn't look up until his shadow fell across her. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. She raised her eyes slowly, and for a moment Ethan forgot what he'd meant to say. Her eyes were gray, storm gray, the color of clouds before rain, and they held a weight that made his chest tighten. "Yes?" Her voice was calm, measured, like a schoolteacher addressing a student. "I don't mean to intrude," Ethan began, suddenly aware of how foolish this was. "But the station master said you've been waiting a while." "I have." "And no one's coming." Her jaw tightened, just barely. "No, no one is coming." Silence hung between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Ethan shifted his weight, searching for words that wouldn't sound like pity. "You got family back east?" he asked finally. "No? Friends?" "Not anymore." She said it without bitterness, just fact. Ethan understood that tone. It was the same one he used when people asked about Sarah. "I'm Ethan Cole," he said. "I run a ranch about 8 miles south of here." Clara Hayes. She didn't offer her hand, and he didn't expect her to. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Cole, but I'll manage." "Manage how?" The question came out sharper than he intended, and Clara's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something harder to name. Pride, maybe. Or exhaustion. "I haven't decided yet," she said evenly. Ethan crouched down so they were eye level, his knees cracking in protest. "Look, I don't know your situation, and I'm not asking, but it's 105 degrees, there's no hotel, and the next train east doesn't come for 3 days. If you're planning to sit here till Friday, you won't make it." Claire's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened in her lap. "What do you suggest, Mr. Cole?" He should have said she could stay at the boarding house. Should have offered to pay for a room, maybe ask the pastor's wife to look after her. That's what a decent man would do. Instead, Ethan heard himself say, "I suggest you come with me." Clara blinked. "Excuse me?" "To the ranch," he clarified quickly, standing up. "Just for a few days, until you figure out what's next. I've got space, more than I need, truth be told. You'd have your own room, no expectations. Just a roof and 3 meals while you sort things out." She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "You don't know me," she said slowly. "No, ma'am, I don't. And yet you're inviting a stranger into your home. Seems like you need a place to stay more than I need to be cautious." Clara stood, and Ethan realized she was taller than he'd expected, maybe 5'7", with the kind of posture that came from years of holding yourself together when everything else was falling apart. "Why?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "Why what? Why would you help me? What do you want in return?" Ethan met her gaze and saw the steel beneath the surface. This wasn't a woman who trusted easily. This was someone who'd been burned before. "I don't want anything," he said quietly. "I just know what it's like to be alone." Something shifted in Clara's expression, a crack in the armor, small but real. "You're a widower," she said. It wasn't a question. 3 years now." "Children?" "No, you?" "Never married." She paused, then added, "Until today, I thought that would change." The bitterness finally crept into her voice, and Ethan felt it like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry," he said. Clara shook her head. "Don't be. I should have known better." She looked past him, toward the empty tracks. I'm 38 years old, Mr. Cole. I spent 15 years teaching school in Boston, saving every penny, building a life I thought mattered. And then the school closed, my savings ran out, and I realized I had nothing. No family, no prospects, no future. Her voice didn't waver, but Ethan could hear the exhaustion beneath the words. So I answered an advertisement, Clara continued. A man in Dodge City, looking for a wife, educated, hardworking, willing to start fresh. It seemed practical, a solution to a problem. She laughed, hollow and sharp. But when his messenger arrived, all he said was, "Mr. Turner sends his regrets. You're not what he expected." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "That's a coward's way out." "Perhaps, but it's done." Clara looked at him, her gray eyes unreadable. "So tell me honestly, Mr. Cole, why should I trust you? What makes you different from the man who left me here?" The question hung in the hot, still air. Ethan could have lied, could have said something noble or reassuring, but Clara Hayes didn't strike him as a woman who wanted pretty words. "I can't promise I'm different," he said finally, "but I can promise I won't leave you sitting on this platform." Clara studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for something. Honesty, maybe, or desperation that matched her own. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Mr. Cole, I'll accept your offer, but only for a few days, and only because I have no better options." "Fair enough." Clara bent to pick up a small cloth bag at her feet, apparently her only possession, and straightened, squaring her shoulders like a soldier preparing for battle. "Lead the way." The ride to the Double Creek Ranch was the longest 8 miles of Ethan's life. Clara sat beside him on the wagon bench, silent and still, her hands folded around the cloth bag in her lap. She didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk, just watched the prairie roll past, endless and unforgiving under the brutal sun. Ethan tried not to stare, but it was hard not to. There was something unsettling about her composure, like she'd decided that showing emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. "You really taught school for 15 years?" he asked, desperate to fill the silence. "I did." "What'd you teach?" "Everything. Literature, mathematics, history, penmanship. It was a small school. We all wore many hats." "You liked it?" Clara glanced at him, and for the first time something like warmth flickered in her eyes. "I loved it." "What happened?" "The board decided to consolidate with a larger school across town. My position was eliminated." She looked back at the horizon. "They offered me work as an assistant, but the pay was half what I'd been earning. I couldn't afford rent on those wages." "So you left Boston?" "I had no reason to stay." Ethan nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. He knew what it was like to watch everything you'd built crumble into dust. "What about you, Mr. Cole?" Claire asked, surprising him. "How does a rancher end up offering charity to stranded women?" "It's not charity." "Then what is it?" Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "Decency, maybe? Or selfishness? Hard to say." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Selfishness? That house gets pretty quiet," he admitted. "Sometimes I go days without talking to another soul. Maybe I just wanted the company." It was the truth, raw and uncomfortable, and Ethan half expected Clara to ask him to turn the wagon around. Instead, she nodded slowly. "I understand that." They rode in silence after that, but it felt different, less like strangers and more like two people who'd recognized something familiar in each other. The ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the dry grass. Ethan's chest tightened as they drew closer. He'd stopped seeing the place through fresh eyes years ago, but now, with Clara beside him, he saw it the way a stranger would. The house was large but worn, its white paint peeling in long strips, the porch sagging on one side. The barn leaned slightly to the left, and the fences, what was left of them, were held together with wire and hope. The windmill creaked in the breeze, its blades moving sluggishly. It looked like exactly what it was, a dying place, held together by a man too stubborn to let it go. Clara didn't say anything as Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, but he could feel her taking it all in. "It's not much," he said quietly. "It's more than I had an hour ago." Ethan climbed down and offered his hand. Clara took it, her grip firm and sure, and stepped onto the dusty ground. "I'll show you inside," Ethan said. "Get you settled before supper." He led her up the porch steps, careful to avoid the rotted board on the left, and pushed open the front door. The inside was cooler, shaded by thick curtains, but the air smelled stale and unused. The main room was spacious, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a long dining table covered in dust. A few pieces of furniture, chairs, a sofa, a bookshelf, sat scattered around like relics from another life. Clara stepped inside slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. "How long since your wife passed?" she asked. 3 years? Almost 4. "And you've lived here alone since then?" "Yeah." Clara walked to the bookshelf, running her finger along the spines. "You haven't changed anything, have you?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Didn't see the point." Clara pulled a book from the shelf, a volume of poetry, Sarah's favorite, and opened it carefully. "This belonged to her. How'd you know?" "Women write their names in books." She showed him the inside cover, where Sarah's handwriting looped across the page. Sarah Cole, 1878. Ethan looked away, his throat tight. Clara closed the book gently and returned it to the shelf. "I'll take whatever room you think best, Mr. Cole, and I'll try not to be a burden." "You're not a burden." "Not yet." She offered a faint, humorless smile. "But give it time." Ethan showed her to the guest room upstairs, a small, clean space with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the south pasture. Clara set her bag down and stood at the window, looking out at the empty land. "I'll leave you to rest," Ethan said from the doorway. "Supper's in an hour, if you're hungry." "Thank you, Mr. Cole." He started to leave, then paused. "You can call me Ethan." Clara turned, studying him with those steady gray eyes. "All right. And you may call me Clara." "Clara." He tested the name, liking the way it sounded. "I'll see you at supper then." He closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence of the house. It felt different now, less empty somehow, even though nothing had changed. Downstairs, Ethan stared at the kitchen, trying to remember the last time he'd cooked a real meal. Most nights, he ate cold beans straight from the can or fried up whatever he could find. Tonight felt like it required more effort. He managed to scrape together something resembling supper: fried ham, biscuits from a tin, and the last of the canned peaches. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. When Clara came down, her hair was pinned back more neatly, and she'd washed the dust from her face. She looked at the table, set for 2, and something unreadable crossed her expression. "You didn't have to go to this trouble," she said. "Wasn't any trouble." They sat across from each other, the silence stretching long and awkward. Ethan wasn't used to eating with company, and he could tell Clara wasn't either. They moved carefully around each other, passing plates and avoiding eye contact like two wary animals sharing a watering hole. Finally, Clara spoke. "This ranch," she said, "you're struggling." It wasn't a question. Ethan set down his fork. "That obvious?" "The fences need repair. The barn needs shoring up. The fields look undersown." She met his gaze evenly. "And you look like a man who hasn't slept in months." Ethan exhaled slowly. "It's been a hard few years. Since your wife died. Before that even. Drought hit us hard in 81, lost half the herd, prices dropped, banks started circling." He rubbed his face. "I've been trying to hold on, but every year it gets harder. I don't know how much longer I can keep this place running." Claire was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "What would you do if you lost it?" she asked. "I don't know. This land's been in my family for 30 years. My father built this house. My grandfather broke the first ground. If I lose it..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "You lose yourself," Clara said quietly. Ethan looked at her, startled by the understanding in her voice. "Yeah," he said. "Something like that." Clara set down her fork and folded her hands on the table. "Then don't lose it." "Easier said than done. Perhaps, but not impossible." She leaned forward slightly. "You need help, Ethan. Real help. Not just hired hands. You need someone who can see the whole picture and help you put it back together." "And where am I supposed to find someone like that?" Clara's eyes glinted with something sharp and determined. "You already have." Ethan stared at her, not understanding. I ran a school, Ethan, Clara continued. I managed budgets, schedules, staff, and 100 students with 100 different needs. I know how to organize chaos. I know how to stretch resources. And I know how to fight for something when everyone else has given up. Clara, I'm not asking for charity, she cut him off, her voice firm. I'm proposing a partnership. The word hung in the air between them. What kind of partnership? Ethan asked carefully. Clara took a breath, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. I need a place to stay, she said slowly. And you need help saving this ranch. What if we combined our efforts? You mean work together? I mean more than that. Clara's hands tightened on the table. I mean a formal arrangement, legal, binding. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. Clara, are you saying, I'm saying we get married. The words fell like stones into still water. Ethan sat back, stunned. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Clara's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. This was costing her something to say. Think about it, Ethan. You need stability. I need security. A marriage would give us both legal standing, shared resources, and a foundation to build from. That's insane. Is it? Clara leaned forward. We're both alone, both struggling, both too proud to ask for help in any normal way. This isn't romance, Ethan. It's survival. You don't even know me. And you don't know me. But we have the rest of our lives to fix that. She paused, her voice softening. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to trust me. Give me a chance to prove I can help you save this place. And in return, give me a reason to stop running. Ethan couldn't breathe. His mind raced, spinning through 1,000 objections, 1,000 reasons why this was the worst idea he'd ever heard. But underneath all of it, one thought kept surfacing. She's right. He did need help. The ranch was dying. He was dying, slowly, quietly, in that big empty house with nothing but ghosts for company. And Clara was offering him a lifeline, not out of pity, not out of desperation, but out of pragmatism, the same cold logic that had kept them both alive this long. This is crazy, he said finally. Yes, Clara agreed, but it's also our best option. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same thing he'd seen on the platform. Strength, dignity, determination, and underneath it all, the same quiet desperation he felt every morning when he woke up alone. If we do this, he said slowly, it has to be honest. No lies. No pretending things are what they're not. Agreed. And no regrets. Once it's done, we see it through. Clara nodded. No regrets. Ethan stood pacing to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. His father used to say that sunsets on the Double Creek were proof that beauty could exist even in hard places. Maybe this was the same thing. He turned back to Clara. There's a preacher in town, he said, marries folks on short notice if you pay him extra. Clara stood, smoothing her skirt. How short? We could be married by tomorrow afternoon. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Clara crossed the room and extended her hand. Then let's not waste time, Mr. Cole. Ethan took her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm, the mark of someone who'd worked for everything she had. Ethan, he corrected. Clara smiled, small and fleeting but real. Ethan. They left for town before dawn, when the sky was still bruised with darkness and the air held the last cool breath before the heat returned. Ethan hitched the horses in silence while Clara waited on the porch, wearing the same gray dress she'd arrived in. It was the only dress she had. Neither of them had slept much. Ethan had lain awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he'd lost his mind. Every rational thought screamed that this was reckless, dangerous, the kind of decision desperate people made when they'd run out of better options. But when morning came and he walked downstairs to find Clara already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her back straight, ready, all his doubts condensed into a single, clarifying thought. They were both desperate, and maybe that was enough. The ride into Millridge took an hour. Clara sat beside him, her face pale in the early light, but her jaw was set with determination. She didn't look like a woman having second thoughts. She looked like a woman preparing for battle. "You're sure about this?" Ethan said. It wasn't a question, but it hung in the air like one anyway. Clara turned to him, her gray eyes clear and unflinching. "Are you?" "I asked you first." "Then, yes, I'm sure." She paused, then added, "Are you going to ask me every mile between here and town?" "Might?" "Then I'll give you the same answer every time." Clara looked back at the road ahead. "I've made my choice, Ethan. I don't take it lightly, and I won't second-guess it. The only question is whether you can do the same." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "I can." "Good." They didn't speak again until the town came into view, a scattered collection of wooden buildings clinging to the prairie like barnacles on a ship's hull. Millridge wasn't much, but it had what they needed: a courthouse, a general store, and Reverend Matthews, who'd marry anyone with cash and a signature. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop outside the small white church at the edge of town. It looked lonely in the morning light, its paint faded and its cross slightly crooked. "Wait here," he said, climbing down. "I'll talk to the Reverend." Clara caught his arm before he could walk away. Her grip was firm, almost fierce. "Ethan." He turned, and for a moment he saw past the composure to the fear underneath. She was scared. Not of him, of everything this meant, everything they were about to do. "We can still turn around," he said quietly. Claire's expression hardened, and she released his arm. "No, we can't." She was right. They'd both crossed a line the moment they made this decision, and there was no going back. Only forward, into whatever came next. Ethan found Reverend Matthews in the rectory behind the church, eating breakfast and reading a worn Bible. The Reverend was a thin man with kind eyes, and a tendency to ask too many questions, but he had a reputation for discretion when the price was right. "Mr. Cole," Matthews said, looking up in surprise. "Didn't expect to see you this morning. Everything all right at the ranch?" "Need a favor, Reverend." Matthews set down his fork, his expression shifting to concern. "What kind of favor?" "The marrying kind." The Reverend blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I need you to perform a wedding, today, as soon as possible." Matthews stood slowly, studying Ethan's face. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." "Who's the bride?" "She's waiting outside." The Reverend's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Ethan, I've known you since you were a boy. I buried your wife 3 years ago. Now you're telling me you want to get married today to a woman I've never even met?" "That's what I'm telling you. This isn't how things are done." "I don't care how things are done," Ethan cut him off, his voice sharper than he intended. "I'm asking you to marry us. Will you do it or not?" Matthews studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Let me meet her first." They walked out together, and Ethan saw Clara standing beside the wagon, her posture perfect despite the dust on her dress and the exhaustion in her eyes. When she saw the Reverend, she stepped forward and extended her hand. "Reverend Matthews," she said, "my name is Clara Hayes. I understand this is unusual, but I assure you we're both of sound mind and entering into this arrangement willingly." Matthews shook her hand, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Hayes, may I ask how you and Mr. Cole met?" "Yesterday," Clara said without hesitation. "At the train station." The Reverend's eyes widened. "Yesterday?" "Yes." "And you're certain you want to marry him?" Clara's gaze didn't waver. "I am." Matthews looked between them, clearly struggling with the situation. "I have to ask, is there some urgency to this? Some reason you can't wait even a few weeks to get to know each other properly?" "We both have our reasons," Ethan said, "and they're private. I'm not trying to pry, son, but marriage is sacred. It's not something to rush into." "We're not rushing," Clara interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "We're making a deliberate choice based on our circumstances. We understand what we're doing, Reverend. We just need someone to make it legal." Matthews rubbed his face, looking suddenly older. "If I do this, you understand there's no going back. Once those vows are spoken, you're bound. In the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of—" "We understand," Ethan said. The Reverend sighed deeply. "Then I'll need witnesses, and $20. "I've got the money," Ethan said. Where do we find witnesses? I'll ask my wife and the postmaster's daughter. They're both in town this morning. Matthews looked at Clara. Miss Hayes, are you sure about this? Clara met his gaze steadily. As sure as I've ever been about anything. Matthews shook his head slowly, but he nodded. All right, give me 10 minutes to gather everyone. Wait inside the church. The interior of the church was cool and dim, light filtering through dusty windows to illuminate rows of empty pews. Clara walked down the aisle slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silence, and stopped at the altar. She stood there for a moment, staring at the simple wooden cross on the wall. Ethan hung back, watching her. You can still change your mind. Stop saying that. Just want to make sure. Clara turned to face him, and the intensity in her expression stopped him cold. Listen to me, Ethan Cole. I have spent the last 15 years of my life being careful, being practical, making safe choices and following the rules. And where did it get me? Stranded on a train platform with nothing but a bag of clothes and a letter telling me I wasn't good enough. Her voice cracked slightly, and she took a breath before continuing. This might be reckless. It might be the worst decision either of us ever makes. But for once in my life, I'm choosing to take a risk. I'm choosing to bet on something instead of playing it safe. So please, stop giving me reasons to doubt. I need you to be as sure as I'm trying to be. Ethan crossed the distance between them and stopped just in front of her. This close, he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the silver threading through her dark hair, the exhaustion she wore like armor. I'm sure, he said quietly. Not because this makes sense, but because I'd rather take this risk with you than keep dying alone in that house. Something shifted in Clara's expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then let's do this. The Reverend returned with his wife, Martha, a plump woman with kind eyes, and Eliza Porter, the postmaster's daughter, who looked both scandalized and delighted by the whole affair. They took their positions as witnesses, whispering to each other while Matthews retrieved his book of common prayer. All right, Matthews said, opening the book. Let's begin. The ceremony was short and perfunctory. Matthews read the traditional vows, his voice steady but concerned, while Ethan and Clara stood side by side at the altar. There were no flowers, no music, no guests filling the pews, just two strangers making promises they barely understood. Do you, Ethan James Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Ethan looked at Clara. Her face was pale but composed, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I do, he said. And do you, Clara Ann Hayes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Clara's voice was clear and unwavering. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Kansas, I pronounce you husband and wife. Matthews closed the book and looked at Ethan. You may kiss your bride. Ethan hadn't thought about this part. He looked at Clara, uncertain, and saw the same hesitation in her eyes. They were married now, legally bound, but they were still strangers. Clara solved the problem by leaning forward and pressing a brief, formal kiss to his cheek. It was over in a second, but Ethan felt the warmth of it long after she pulled away. Congratulations, Matthews said, though he didn't sound convinced. Martha and Eliza clapped politely, still whispering to each other. Ethan paid the Reverend, signed the marriage certificate with Clara's name next to his, and walked out of the church, a married man for the second time in his life. The sun was higher now, already heating the air to an uncomfortable simmer. Clara stood on the church steps, staring out at the town with an unreadable expression. Well, she said finally, that's done. Yeah. Ethan didn't know what else to say. You hungry? We could get breakfast before we head back. Clara looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, she smiled. Small and tentative, but genuine. I think I'd like that. They ate at the only restaurant in town, a cramped little place that smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee. The owner, a woman named Dolores, stared at them openly when they walked in together, clearly trying to place who Clara was and why Ethan Cole had a woman with him. "Just got married," Ethan said flatly, sitting down at a corner table. Dolores's eyes widened. "Married? When?" "About 20 minutes ago." The restaurant went silent. Every head turned to stare. Ethan could feel the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their disbelief. Clara, to her credit, didn't flinch. She sat across from Ethan, folded her hands on the table, and met Dolores's stare with perfect composure. "Congratulations," Dolores said finally, though she looked utterly baffled. I'll get you some coffee." The whispers started as soon as Dolores walked away. Ethan could hear them, fragments of conversation drifting through the room like smoke. "Who is she?" "Never seen her before." "Heard she came in on yesterday's train." "Married after one day? That's not decent." Claire's expression didn't change, but Ethan saw her hands tighten slightly on the table. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "I'm used to it," Claire replied. "People always talk." "Does it bother you?" "Not anymore." She glanced around the room, then back at him. "Let them stare. We know why we did this. That's all that matters." Dolores returned with coffee and took their order, eggs, bacon, and toast for both of them. The food was plain but hot, and they ate in silence while the rest of the restaurant continued to buzz with speculation. When they were finished, Ethan left money on the table and stood. Clara followed, and they walked out together into the blazing morning sun. "That was uncomfortable," Ethan admitted once they were back at the wagon. "It was," Clara agreed, "but we'll have to get used to it. People will talk about us for weeks." "Months, probably." "Then let them." Clara climbed into the wagon, settling herself on the bench. "We have more important things to worry about than gossip." Ethan took the reins, and they headed back toward the ranch. The town fell away behind them, and the prairie stretched out ahead, endless and indifferent. After a while, Clara spoke. "What happens now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what's the plan? You married me because you need help saving the ranch. So where do we start?" Ethan thought about it. He'd been so focused on the decision itself that he hadn't thought much about what came after. "The fences need fixing," he said finally, "and the cattle need to be moved to better pasture. After that, we need to figure out the finances, what we owe, what we can afford, what we can sell if we have to." Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll need to see your account books. All of them. I want to know exactly where you stand financially." "They're a mess." "I assumed they would be." She glanced at him. "But I can fix a mess. That's what I do." "What about the house?" Ethan asked. "You said you wanted to help, but I don't expect you to—" "I'll do whatever needs doing," Clara interrupted. "Cooking, cleaning, managing the household. But I'm not doing it because I'm your wife. I'm doing it because it's part of the partnership." Ethan nodded slowly. "Fair enough." They rode in silence for a while, the sun climbing higher and the heat pressing down like a weight. Ethan's mind drifted to Sarah, what she would have thought of all this. She'd always been soft-spoken, gentle, the kind of woman who made everything feel lighter just by being there. Clara was nothing like Sarah. Clara was hard edges and sharp decisions, a woman who'd survived by refusing to break. She didn't soften the world. She faced it head-on, unflinching. And maybe that was exactly what Ethan needed. When they reached the ranch, Ethan helped Clara down from the wagon, and they stood together in the dusty yard, looking at the house and the land beyond. "Home," Clara said quietly. The word sounded strange in her mouth, like she was testing it out. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Home." Clara turned to him, her expression serious. "I meant what I said, Ethan. I'm going to help you save this place, but I need you to trust me. That means letting me make decisions even if you don't agree with them." "I can do that." "And I need you to be honest with me, about the ranch, about the debts, about everything. No secrets." Ethan met her gaze. "No secrets." Clara extended her hand and Ethan shook it, sealing the partnership the same way they'd sealed the marriage, with a promise and a handshake. The first thing Clara did was take over the account books. Ethan brought them down from the office, 3 ledgers, all of them stained and dog-eared, filled with his scratchy handwriting and crossed-out numbers. He set them on the kitchen table and stepped back, suddenly embarrassed by how bad they looked. Clara sat down and opened the first ledger, her eyes scanning the pages with the methodical precision of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. "When did you last balance these?" she asked, without looking up. Uh, I'm not sure. A year, maybe?" Clara's eyebrows rose. "A year. I know it's bad. It's worse than bad, Ethan. This is chaos." She flipped through the pages, shaking her head. "Half of these entries don't have dates. You've got expenses mixed in with income, and I can't tell which debts have been paid and which are still outstanding." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm better with cattle than numbers." "Clearly." Clara pulled out a blank piece of paper and a pencil. "All right, we're starting over. I need you to tell me everything, every debt, every expense, every source of income. Don't leave anything out." For the next 3 hours, Ethan sat at the table and answered Clara's questions while she wrote everything down in neat, precise columns. It was excruciating. Every number felt like an admission of failure, every debt a reminder of how far he'd fallen. "You owe the bank $1,200, Clara said finally, setting down her pencil, "and another $300 to the feed store, plus the general store, the blacksmith, and the farrier. Total outstanding debts, just over $2,000. Ethan's stomach dropped. Hearing it all laid out like that made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "How much cash do you have on hand?" Clara asked. "Maybe $50. "And livestock?" 70 head of cattle, a dozen horses, some chickens." Clara did the math in her head, her expression grim. "If you sold everything today, you might cover half your debts. Maybe." "So we're finished?" "No." Clara looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "We're just getting started." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land. "You've been trying to survive, Ethan, but survival isn't enough. We need to rebuild, strategically, carefully, with a plan." "What kind of plan?" Clara turned back to him. "First, we stop the bleeding. No more credit, no more borrowing. We pay cash for everything, which means we live lean. Second, we increase revenue. That means selling what we can afford to lose and investing in what will grow. And third, we diversify. A ranch can't survive on cattle alone, not in a drought. We need other income streams." Ethan stared at her. "You've been here one day and you've already figured all this out?" "I ran a school with a budget smaller than your annual feed costs," Clara said. "This is the same principle, just applied to different problems." "And you think it'll work?" "I think it's our only chance." Clara sat back down and pulled the ledgers toward her. "But it's going to take time and work. A lot of work." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then let's get to it." Over the next week, Clara transformed the ranch in ways Ethan hadn't thought possible. She started with the house, attacking years of neglect with a ferocity that left him stunned. Dust was banished, windows were washed, floors were scrubbed until they gleamed. She organized the pantry, inventoried every supply, and threw out anything that was spoiled or useless. "Why do you have 17 cans of beans?" she asked one afternoon, holding up a rusted tin. "In case I get hungry?" "Ethan, these expired 2 years ago." She tossed them into a box marked for disposal. "From now on, we keep only what we need and nothing more." But Clara didn't stop at housework. She accompanied Ethan out to the fields, asking questions about the land, the cattle, the water sources. She studied the fences, noting which sections needed immediate repair and which could wait. She watched him work, absorbing everything, and then started offering suggestions. "You're overgrazing the north pasture," she said one evening, pointing to a map she'd drawn. "Move half the herd here to the east section. The grass is better and it'll give the north time to recover." Ethan looked at the map, then at Clara. "How do you know about grazing patterns?" "I read." She tapped the map. "Trust me." He did. And she was right. Slowly, day by day, the ranch started to change. It wasn't dramatic, just small improvements, tiny adjustments that added up to something larger. The fences got fixed, the cattle got moved, the account books started to make sense, and Ethan started to realize that Clara wasn't just helping him, she was saving him. But it wasn't easy. They argued, frequently. Clara had opinions about everything, and she wasn't afraid to voice them. Ethan, used to making his own decisions, bristled at being questioned. "I've been ranching my whole life," he said one afternoon, his voice tight with frustration. "I know what I'm doing." If you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't be $2,000 in debt, Clara shot back. Ethan glared at her. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's true. Clara softened slightly. I'm not trying to undermine you, Ethan. I'm trying to help. But you have to let me. He took a breath, forcing himself to calm down. Fine. What do you suggest? I suggest we sell 10 head of cattle now while the prices are still decent. Use the money to pay down the bank debt and buy seed for next season. Then we plant winter wheat in the south field. It'll give us a second income stream and protect us if cattle prices drop. Ethan considered it. It made sense, more sense than anything he'd come up with. All right, he said finally. We'll do it your way. Clara nodded, satisfied. Good. The tension between them eased after that. They learned to work together, to trust each other's strengths. Ethan handled the physical labor, the fences, the cattle, the heavy lifting. Clara handled the planning, the finances, the strategy. They were partners. Not in the romantic sense. There was still an awkwardness between them, a careful distance they both maintained. But in the ways that mattered, they were building something together. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset. The sky was streaked with gold and crimson, and the air was finally starting to cool. I've been thinking, Clara said quietly. About? About what comes next. We've stopped the bleeding, but we need more. The ranch needs to generate real income, not just survival money. Ethan nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. What do you have in mind? Clara hesitated, then said, What if we opened a school? Ethan turned to stare at her. A school? There are families scattered all over this county with children who have nowhere to learn. The nearest school is 20 miles away, too far for most. If we opened a small school here on the ranch, we could charge tuition. Not much, but enough to make a difference. And you'd teach? That's what I do, Ethan. Clara's eyes gleamed with something he hadn't seen before. Hope. I'm good at it, and it would give us steady income while we rebuild the ranch. Ethan considered it. It was unconventional, maybe even risky. But then again, so was everything else they'd done. How much would we need to start? He asked. Not much. A room in the house, some books, a chalkboard. I can make do with very little. Then let's do it. Clara smiled, wide and genuine this time. Really? Really? Ethan smiled back. If anyone can make it work, it's you. Clara stood, suddenly energized. I'll start planning tomorrow. We can send word to the neighboring families, set up a schedule. Oh, we'll need desks. Can you build desks? I can try. Good. This is going to work, Ethan. I know it is. He watched her pace the porch, her mind already racing ahead, and felt something warm settle in his chest. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something close. Respect. Gratitude. Partnership. Maybe that was enough. As the stars began to appear overhead, Clara stopped pacing and looked at him. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For taking a chance on me. For letting me help. Ethan shook his head. You're the one who took the chance. I just got lucky. Clara's smile softened. Maybe we both did. The storm came without warning on a Thursday afternoon in late September, rolling across the prairie like a dark fist. Ethan had been mending fence posts in the east pasture when he felt the shift in the air, that sudden drop in pressure that made his ears pop and his skin prickle with electricity. He looked up and saw it coming, a wall of black clouds churning across the horizon, moving fast, too fast. Hell, he muttered, dropping his tools and running for his horse. The cattle were scattered across 3 different pastures, and if that storm hit before he could get them to shelter, they'd stampede. He'd seen it happen before. Panicked animals running blind, breaking through fences, trampling each other, disappearing into the night. A storm like this could wipe out everything they'd spent the last month rebuilding. He rode hard toward the house, the wind already picking up, whipping dust devils across the yard. Clara was on the porch, her hand shading her eyes as she watched the approaching darkness. Get inside, Ethan shouted as he swung down from his horse. Lock the doors and stay away from the windows. What about the cattle? Clara called back, her voice barely audible over the rising wind. I'll handle it. You can't do it alone. There's too many. Clara, get inside. But she didn't move. She stood there on the porch, her dress whipping around her legs, her hair coming loose from its pins, and Ethan saw something fierce and stubborn flash across her face. No, she said. What? I said no. Clara came down the steps, moving toward the barn. You need help, and I'm all you've got. Tell me what to do. Clara, you don't know how to... Then teach me fast. She stopped in front of him, her jaw set. We're partners, remember? For better or worse? Well, this is worse. So stop trying to protect me and let me help. The first drops of rain hit like bullets, fat and cold. Thunder rolled across the sky, so loud it shook the ground. Ethan looked at Clara, this woman he'd known for barely a month, who'd spent her entire life in cities and schoolrooms, and saw the same determination he'd seen at the train station. She wasn't backing down. All right, he said, making a decision he'd probably regret. Can you ride? I can learn. Good enough. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the barn. We've got maybe 10 minutes before this thing hits. The cattle are in the north and west pastures. We need to drive them to the canyon shelter on the east side. You take the west group, I'll take the north. Just get behind them and keep them moving forward. Don't try to control them, just push them in the right direction. And if they stampede, get out of the way. He saddled Clara's horse in record time, choosing the steadiest mare they had, a roan named Gracie who wouldn't spook easily. Clara mounted awkwardly, her dress bunching up around her legs, but she grabbed the reins and set her shoulders. West pasture, she repeated. Drive them east. Don't be a hero, Ethan said, swinging onto his own horse. If it gets too dangerous, let them go and save yourself. Clara looked at him, rain streaming down her face. Same to you. Then she kicked Gracie forward and rode into the storm. Ethan watched her go for half a second, his heart in his throat, before wheeling his horse around and galloping toward the north pasture. The rain was coming harder now, turning the dust to mud, and lightning split the sky with cracks that made his teeth ache. He could hear the cattle bellowing in the distance, their voices high and frightened. He found them clustered near the far fence, 20 head of them, already agitated and looking for a way out. Ethan circled around behind them, yelling and waving his arms, and they started to move, slowly at first, then faster, as another boom of thunder sent them into a panicked trot. Come on, Ethan shouted, pushing his horse harder. Move! The cattle ran, their hooves churning mud, and Ethan rode behind them like a man possessed. He couldn't think about Clara, couldn't wonder if she was all right. All he could do was keep pushing forward, driving the herd towards safety. The canyon shelter was a natural depression in the land, surrounded by rock outcroppings that would break the wind and keep the cattle from scattering. Ethan drove his group straight into it, counting heads as they passed. 18, 19, 20, all accounted for. He turned back toward the west pasture, his heart pounding. Where was Clara? The storm was fully on them now, wind howling like something alive, rain coming down in sheets so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. Lightning struck somewhere close enough that he smelled ozone and felt the hair on his arms stand up. Clara, he shouted, but the wind tore her name away. Then he saw movement through the rain, a shape on horseback, driving a mass of dark bodies ahead of it. Clara. She was bent low over Gracie's neck, her hair plastered to her head, driving the cattle forward with a determination that bordered on reckless. Ethan rode to meet her, falling in beside her to help guide the herd. You all right? He yelled. Fine, she shouted back, though her face was white and her hands were shaking on the reins. Just keep them moving. Together they drove the second group into the shelter, the cattle crowding together against the rocks. Ethan did a quick count. 32 total. They'd gotten them all. We need to get back, he shouted to Clara, but she was already pointing toward the barn, where a loose gate was swinging wildly in the wind. The horses, she yelled. They'll break out. She was right. If the gate came off its hinges, the horses would scatter into the storm, and they'd spend days trying to round them up, if they could find them at all. Ethan cursed and spurred his horse toward the barn. Clara followed, both of them riding hard against the wind. They reached the gate at the same time, jumping down and fighting to secure it while the horses inside screamed and kicked at their stalls. Ethan grabbed the gate and pulled it closed, but the latch was broken, swinging uselessly. Hold this, he shouted to Clara, and she threw her weight against the gate while he fumbled for something, anything, to tie it shut. A piece of rope. That's all he had. He wrapped it around the post and pulled it tight, his fingers numb with cold and rain, and finally got it knotted. The gate held. Go! He yelled, grabbing Clara's arm and pulling her toward the house. They ran through the mud, slipping and stumbling while the storm raged around them. Lightning struck the windmill, and sparks showered down like fireworks. They made it to the porch just as the hail started, chunks of ice the size of walnuts, hammering the ground with enough force to shatter bone. Ethan shoved Clara through the door and slammed it behind them, both of them collapsing against it, gasping for breath. For a moment, they just sat there on the floor, soaked to the skin, shaking from adrenaline and cold. The storm screamed outside, battering the house with wind and ice, and Ethan thought about how close they'd come to losing everything. That, Clara said between gasps, was insane. Ethan started to laugh, raw and breathless. You rode into a storm to save cattle you didn't even know we had. There are cattle now, aren't they? Clara pushed wet hair out of her face, and despite the exhaustion in her eyes, she was smiling. That makes them worth saving. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't the composed schoolteacher he'd met at the train station. This was someone else entirely, someone fierce, someone who didn't run when things got hard. You did good out there, he said quietly. So did you. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind howled, the hail pounded, the house creaked and groaned but held firm. Finally Clara stood, wringing water from her dress. We should change into dry clothes before we freeze to death. Good idea. But neither of them moved. They stood there in the dim hallway, dripping onto the floor, and Ethan realized they were closer than they'd ever been. Close enough that he could see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, close enough to count the freckles on her nose that he'd never noticed before. Clara, he said, his voice rough. Yes? Thank you for not giving up. Clara's expression softened. I could say the same to you. She reached out and squeezed his hand, just once, brief and warm, and then she was gone, climbing the stairs to change. Ethan stood alone in the hallway, his hand still tingling from her touch, and wondered when exactly this arrangement had stopped feeling like a business partnership and started feeling like something else. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the world washed clean and strangely quiet. Ethan walked out into the gray morning light and surveyed the damage. The windmill was scorched but still standing. A section of the barn roof had blown off. Fences were down in 3 places. But the house was intact. The animals were safe, and they'd made it through. Clara joined him on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, her hair still damp from washing. How bad is it? Could have been worse, Ethan said. We lost some fence, but we can fix that. The cattle are all accounted for. And the crops? Ethan winced. They'd planted winter wheat 2 weeks ago, and he'd been counting on that crop to bring in desperately needed cash. I need to check, but I'm guessing we lost most of it. Clara was quiet for a moment, then said, Then we'll plant again. Clara, we don't have the money. We'll find it. She looked at him, her eyes steady. We've come this far. We're not giving up now. Over the next few days, they worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing the damage. Ethan fixed fences while Clara helped where she could, holding posts steady while he drove them into the ground, fetching tools, learning as she went. Word of the storm spread through the county, and neighbors started showing up, men Ethan hadn't seen in months offering to help with repairs. It was the rancher's code. When someone was in trouble, you helped, no questions asked. But Ethan noticed the way they looked at Clara, curious glances, whispered conversations when they thought he wasn't listening. The story of their sudden marriage had traveled fast, and people didn't know what to make of it. Tom Henderson, who owned the ranch to the north, pulled Ethan aside while they were replacing a section of barn roof. That your new wife? He asked, nodding toward Clara, who was carrying lumber across the yard. Yeah, Ethan said carefully. Heard you married her the same day you met her. That's right. Tom whistled low. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard, or the dumbest. Probably both. Tom hammered in a nail, then said, She seems capable. She is. You happy? The question caught Ethan off guard. He looked across the yard at Clara, who was talking to another rancher's wife, her hands gesturing as she explained something. She looked tired but determined, her dress dusty and her hair coming loose, and Ethan realized the answer was simple. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." Tom grinned. Then I guess it was the brave kind of dumb. By the end of the week, the ranch was mostly repaired and the neighbors had gone home. Ethan and Clara stood in the yard surveying their work. "We should start on the school next week," Clara said. "I've already had 3 families ask about enrollment." Ethan nodded. They'd cleared out one of the unused rooms in the house, and Clara had been gathering supplies, books, slates, chalk. She'd even convinced the general store owner to donate some old desks he'd been storing in his warehouse. "How many students do you think we'll get?" Ethan asked. 6 to start, maybe more if word spreads. Clara smiled. "It's not much, but it's a beginning." "Everything's a beginning with you." "Is that a complaint?" "No." Ethan looked at her. "It's an observation. You don't just fix things, you rebuild them, better than they were before." Clara's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked away. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "No," Ethan said quietly. "You're doing more than that." Before Clara could respond, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching fast. Ethan tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle leaning against the porch. Unexpected visitors usually meant trouble, but as the rider got closer, Ethan relaxed. It was just a boy, maybe 16, riding a spotted pony and waving a piece of paper over his head. "Mr. Cole, sit!" the boy shouted as he pulled up in front of the house. "I got a message for you." Ethan took the paper, recognizing the bank's letterhead immediately. His stomach sank. "What is it?" Clara asked, stepping closer. Ethan unfolded the letter and read it quickly, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he crumpled it in his fist. "The bank," he said flatly. "They're calling in the loan." Clara went pale. "When?" "End of the month. If I don't pay the full $1,200 by then, they're foreclosing." The boy shifted uncomfortably on his pony. "Sorry, Mr. Cole. I'm just the messenger." "I know, son." Ethan pulled a coin from his pocket and tossed it to the boy. "Thanks for riding out." The boy caught the coin and rode off, leaving Ethan and Clara standing in the yard, the letter crumpled between them like a death sentence. "How much do we have?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Maybe $300, and that's if we sell every cow we can spare." "Then we'll sell them." "Clara, even if we do, we're still $900 short." "Then we'll find another way." Clara took the letter from his hand, smoothing it out and reading it herself. Her expression hardened. "We're not losing this ranch. Not after everything we've done." "What do you suggest? We can't make $900 appear out of thin air." Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter. Then she looked up at Ethan, and he saw a dangerous glint in her eyes. "What if we could?" "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about taking a risk." Clara folded the letter carefully and handed it back. "You said the winter wheat crop is gone, right?" "Mostly, yeah. But the south field is still intact. The soil's good, and we've got 3 weeks before the first frost." Clara started pacing, her mind clearly racing. What if we planted something fast-growing, something we could harvest and sell before the bank's deadline? Ethan frowned. "Like what?" "Turnips, rutabagas, root vegetables that mature quickly and sell well in the fall. If we plant now and work day and night, we could have a harvestable crop in 3 weeks." "That's a long shot, Clara." "So was getting married after one day," she shot back. "But we did it anyway, and it's working. This can work too." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was impossible, but the fierce determination in her eyes stopped him. She believed it could work, and against all reason, he found himself believing it too. "All right," he said, "let's do it." They planted the next day, working side by side in the south field from dawn until dusk. Clara had never farmed before, but she learned fast, dropping seeds into furrows while Ethan covered them with soil. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but she didn't complain. They worked in silence mostly, too tired for conversation, but there was a rhythm to it, a synchronicity that came from working toward the same goal. When Ethan looked up and saw Clara bent over the rows, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, he felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked him sideways. On the third day, a wagon rolled up to the house, and Walt Grimes climbed down, tipping his hat. "Heard you're in trouble with the bank," Walt said without preamble. "Word travels fast." "Always does." Walt looked at the field, where Clara was still working. "Also heard your wife's been asking around town about selling vegetables." "That true?" Ethan nodded. "We're planting a crop, hoping to sell it before the bank's deadline." Walt scratched his chin. "That's a hell of a gamble." "We don't have much choice." "Maybe you do." Walt pulled an envelope from his pocket. "I talked to some of the other folks in town. We took up a collection. It's not much, about $200, but it's yours if you need it." Ethan stared at the envelope, stunned. "Walt, I can't." "You can and you will," Walt said firmly. "You're one of us, Ethan. Your father helped half the town when they needed it, and we don't forget that. Besides, your wife's planning to open a school, right? That'll benefit all of us. Consider this an investment." Ethan took the envelope, his throat tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank her." Walt nodded toward Clara. "She's the one who convinced us you were worth betting on." After Walt left, Ethan walked out to the field and handed Clara the envelope. She opened it, her eyes widening when she saw the cash inside. "How did you—" "I didn't." "You did." Ethan smiled. "Apparently you've been talking to people in town, making friends, convincing them we're not crazy." Clara's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. $200. That puts us at $500. We're halfway there." "Yeah." Ethan looked at the field, at the tiny green shoots just beginning to emerge from the soil. "Now we just need the other half." The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Ethan's life. They worked the field every day, watering and weeding, praying the weather would hold. Clara kept the books, managed the household, and somehow found time to prepare for the school's opening. She barely slept. Neither did Ethan. But the crop grew. Against all odds, it grew. When harvest time came, they worked through the night, pulling turnips and rutabagas from the earth and loading them into crates. Clara's hands bled from the work, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Everything depended on this. They sold the vegetables in town, going door to door, offering deals to anyone who'd buy. Clara charmed the shopkeepers. Ethan negotiated with the restaurants. Slowly, painfully, the money added up. 3 days before the bank's deadline, they counted their earnings. $1,180, Clara said, her voice shaking. "We're $20 short." Ethan slumped in his chair, exhausted beyond words. They'd done everything right, worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life, and it still wasn't enough. "We could sell Gracie," Clara said quietly. "The mare I rode during the storm. She's worth at least $50. "No." Ethan shook his head. "That's your horse." "Ethan, if we lose the ranch, we lose everything. The horse doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why?" "Because you rode her into a storm to save this place," Ethan said. "Because she's yours, and I'm not taking that away from you." Clara's expression softened, and she reached across the table to take his hand. "Then what do we do?" Ethan thought for a moment, then stood. "We sell the pocket watch." Clara blinked. "What pocket watch?" "My father's." Ethan went to the mantel and took down a small wooden box. Inside was a gold pocket watch engraved with his father's initials. It was the only thing of value Ethan had left from his family. "It's worth at least $50, maybe more." "Ethan, you can't—" "Yes, I can." He closed the box and tucked it into his pocket. "This ranch is our future, Clara. The watch is just the past. I know which one matters more." The next morning, Ethan sold the watch to a jeweler in town for $65. When he came home and laid the money on the table, Clara looked at him with something that might have been love. "We did it," she whispered. "Yeah," Ethan said. "We did." On the day the payment was due, they walked into the bank together, carrying $1,200 in cash. The banker, a thin man named Morrison, who'd been hounding Ethan for months, looked shocked when they laid the money on his desk. "You actually got it," Morrison said, counting the bills twice. "We did," Clara said coolly. Now mark the loan as paid in full." Morrison stamped the paperwork, and just like that, the ranch was saved. They walked out of the bank into the bright autumn sunlight, and Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. Clara slipped her hand into his, and he squeezed it tight. "We make a good team," she said. "The best," Ethan agreed. And standing there on the dusty street with the sun on their faces and their future stretching out before them, Ethan realized that somewhere along the way, this partnership had become something more. He didn't know when it happened, maybe during the storm, maybe while planting crops in the dark, maybe in 1,000 small moments he hadn't noticed at the time. But he knew it now. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was home. The school opened on a crisp October morning, and Clara stood at the door of the converted room like a general surveying her troops. 6 children arrived that first day, ranging from 7 to 14 years old, brought by parents who eyed Ethan and Clara with a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope. The Hendersons brought their 2 daughters. The Porters sent their son. A widow named Mrs. Sullivan rode in with her twins, a boy and a girl who looked identical except for the ribbons in the girl's hair. "This is it?" one of the fathers asked, peering into the room where Clara had arranged the donated desks in neat rows. "Just one room?" "One room is all we need," Clara said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years managing far more difficult situations. "Your children will receive instruction in reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and penmanship. I expect them here by 8 each morning, and they'll be dismissed at 3. Tuition is $2 per child per month, payable at the start of each term." The parents exchanged glances. $2 wasn't much, but it was money nonetheless, and Ethan could see them calculating whether the investment was worth it. "My oldest can already read some," Mrs. Sullivan said hesitantly. "Will she be bored?" Clara smiled. "I taught students from ages 5 to 18 in the same classroom for a decade, Mrs. Sullivan. I promise you, no one will be bored." That seemed to satisfy them. The parents paid their tuition, kissed their children goodbye, and left. Clara closed the door, turned to face 6 nervous faces staring up at her, and felt something she hadn't felt in over a year: purpose. "Good morning," she said, moving to stand at the front of the room. "My name is Mrs. Cole, and I'm very glad you're here. Now, let's begin." Ethan watched from the doorway for a moment, seeing Clara transform before his eyes. The exhaustion that had been etched into her face for weeks seemed to lift. Her posture straightened. Her voice gained strength. This was what she was meant to do, and it showed in every gesture, every word. He slipped away quietly, leaving her to her work, and headed out to the barn where his own work waited. The ranch wouldn't run itself, and there were fences to mend, cattle to move, and 100 other tasks that demanded his attention. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was doing it alone. The days developed a rhythm after that. Clara taught from 8 to 3, her voice carrying through the house as she guided the children through lessons. Ethan worked the land, moving between pastures and fields, slowly rebuilding what the drought and his own despair had torn down. In the evenings, they'd sit together at the kitchen table, Clara grading papers while Ethan balanced the books, their shoulders nearly touching in the lamplight. "Tommy Henderson can't spell to save his life," Clara said one evening, marking up a slate with red chalk. "But he has a gift for numbers. I've never seen a child calculate sums so quickly." "Takes after his father," Ethan said, not looking up from the ledger. "Tom can figure profit margins in his head faster than most men can write them down." "Well, Tommy's wasting his talent on basic arithmetic. I'm going to start giving him more advanced problems." Clara set down the slate and stretched, her neck cracking. "How are we looking this month?" Ethan ran his finger down the column of numbers. "Better. The school's bringing in $12 a month, and we sold another 10 head of cattle for good prices. We're actually ahead for the first time in 3 years." Clara leaned over to look at the ledger, and Ethan caught the scent of chalk dust and lavender soap. It was becoming familiar, that scent. Comforting. "We should invest some of that," Clara said, pointing to a number. "Put it aside for emergencies, and we need to buy more seed for spring planting." "Already ordered it." "Good." Clara straightened and rolled her shoulders. "I'm thinking of adding evening classes for adults who want to learn to read. There are at least 3 families in the area where the parents never had schooling." Ethan looked up at her. "When would you do that?" You're already teaching all day. Twice a week, after supper? It wouldn't be much, but it would help. Clara met his gaze. And it would bring in more money. Clara, you're going to work yourself to death. I'm going to work as hard as necessary, she corrected. Same as you. He couldn't argue with that. Ethan stood, closing the ledger. Then I'll help. I can teach basic arithmetic while you handle reading. Clara's expression softened. You do that? We're partners, remember? He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so natural he didn't realize what he'd done until Clara's breath caught. They stood there for a moment, closer than they'd been since the storm, and Ethan felt the air between them charged with something unspoken. Then Clara stepped back, clearing her throat. I should finish grading these papers. Right, and I should check on the horses. They moved apart, both suddenly aware of the line they were dancing around. The line between partnership and something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to name. The weeks passed, and the ranch continued to stabilize. The school grew to 8 students, then 10. Clara's evening classes started with 3 adults and quickly expanded to 7. The Double Creek Ranch, which had been dying just months ago, was alive again, humming with activity and purpose. But it wasn't easy. The work was relentless, the hours brutal, and there were moments when Ethan wondered if they'd taken on too much. Clara pushed herself harder than anyone he'd ever known, often working until midnight, grading papers or preparing lessons, her face drawn with exhaustion. You need to rest, Ethan said one night, finding her asleep at the kitchen table, her head pillowed on an open book. Clara jerked awake, disoriented. What time is it? Past 11. Come on, you're going to bed. I have to finish. It can wait. Ethan took the book from under her head and held out his hand. Come on, Clara, you're no good to anyone if you collapse. She let him pull her to her feet, swaying slightly. I'm fine. You're exhausted. So are you. That's different. How? Clara's eyes flashed with irritation. Because you're a man? Because you're supposed to work yourself into the ground while I sit idle? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Clara pulled her hand away, suddenly angry. I'm doing exactly what we agreed to do. I'm helping save this ranch. Don't tell me to rest when you won't do the same. They stood facing each other in the dim kitchen, tension crackling between them. Ethan could see the exhaustion in every line of her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly from overwork. But he could also see the pride, the stubbornness, the refusal to be treated like something fragile. I'm not trying to coddle you, he said quietly. I'm trying to take care of you. Clara's anger deflated slightly. Why? Because someone should. Ethan took a step closer. Because you've been taking care of everyone else. Me, the ranch, the students. And no one's taking care of you. Clara's eyes shimmered with sudden tears, and she looked away quickly. I don't need taking care of. Maybe not, but you deserve it anyway. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara wiped her eyes roughly, refusing to let the tears fall. I'm going to bed, she said, her voice thick. Good. She started toward the stairs, then paused and turned back. Ethan. Yeah? Thank you. He watched her climb the stairs, her footsteps slow and heavy, and felt his chest tighten with an emotion he wasn't ready to examine too closely. The turning point came on a cold November afternoon when a stranger rode up to the house. Ethan was in the barn, shoeing one of the horses, when he heard the hoofbeats. He looked up to see a well-dressed man on a fine black horse, surveying the property with an appraising eye. Help you? Ethan called, setting down his tools and wiping his hands on his pants. The man dismounted, moving with the careful precision of someone who wasn't used to physical labor. He was maybe 50, with silver hair and expensive clothes that marked him as someone from the city. Mr. Cole? The man asked. That's right. My name is Richard Whitmore. I'm a land agent from Topeka. He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it over. I represent a group of investors interested in acquiring property in this region. Ethan's stomach sank. Not interested in selling. I haven't made an offer yet, Whitmore said with a practiced smile. Perhaps you'd like to hear what we're proposing before you refuse. Don't need to hear it. This land's not for sale. Whitmore's smile didn't waver. Mr. Cole, I understand this ranch has been in your family for some time. I also understand you've had some financial difficulties in recent years. My clients are prepared to make you a very generous offer, enough to pay off any remaining debts and give you a comfortable start somewhere else. Somewhere else? Ethan's hands curled into fists. This is my home. Of course. I meant no offense. Whitmore gestured toward the house. But surely a practical man like yourself can see the value in considering all options. The railroad is expanding westward, and this land is perfectly positioned for a new depot. My clients are willing to pay $10,000 for the property. The number hit Ethan like a physical blow. $10,000. It was more money than he'd ever seen in his life, more than enough to start fresh anywhere he wanted. But it was also his grandfather's sweat in this soil, his father's dreams in every fence post, Sarah's laughter in the walls of that house, and now Clara's determination woven through it all, making it something new and alive. No, Ethan said flatly. Whitmore's smile finally faltered. I'm sorry? I said no, the ranch isn't for sale. Not for $10,000, not for $100,000. Mr. Cole, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Now get off my land. Whitmore's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. My clients won't take no for an answer. They'll find another way to acquire this property, and you'll wish you'd taken the offer while it was on the table. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Whitmore swung back onto his horse. Think about it, Mr. Cole. That's a lot of money to turn down out of sentimentality. He rode off, leaving Ethan standing in the yard with his heart pounding and his mind racing. $10,000. The practical part of him knew it was a fortune. But the part of him that had fought too hard to save this place, the part that had married a stranger and planted crops in the dark and ridden through storms, that part knew the ranch was worth more than any amount of money. He found Clara in the schoolroom helping one of the younger children sound out words. She looked up when he entered, and her smile faded immediately when she saw his expression. What happened? She asked, dismissing the child to play outside. Ethan told her about Whitmore and the offer. Clara listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with each word. $10,000, she said when he finished. That's a substantial sum. It is. And you turned it down. I did. Clara studied him carefully. Without even discussing it with me first. Ethan felt a flash of defensiveness. This is my family's land, and I'm your family now. Clara cut him off, her voice sharp. We're partners, Ethan. That means we make decisions together, especially ones this big. She was right, and he knew it. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped thinking of this as just his ranch and started thinking of it as theirs. But old habits died hard. I'm sorry, he said. You're right. I should have talked to you first. Clara's expression softened. Thank you. She walked to the window, looking out at the land. What did he mean when he said his clients would find another way? I don't know, but it sounded like a threat. Then we need to be prepared. Clara turned back to him, her mind clearly working through possibilities. If they can't buy the land, they might try to force you out. Late tax payments, legal challenges, anything to make it too expensive to keep. How do you know all that? I saw it happen in Boston. Developers wanted to build on the land where my school was located. They tried everything, building code violations, zoning disputes, pressure on the board. Eventually, they got what they wanted. Clara's jaw tightened. We can't let that happen here. What do you suggest? We make sure everything is in order. All taxes paid on time, all paperwork filed correctly, no legal vulnerabilities they can exploit. Clara started pacing, her teacher's mind shifting into planning mode. And we find allies. The more people who benefit from this ranch staying operational, the harder it will be for anyone to force us out. Ethan watched her pace, grateful once again for her sharp mind and sharper instincts. The school helps with that. It does. But we need more. What if we opened the land for community events? Harvest festivals, church gatherings, things that make the ranch a central part of the community. You're thinking if we become valuable to the town, they'll fight to keep us here. Exactly. Clara stopped pacing and looked at him. We can't fight money with money, but we can fight it with relationships. Over the next month, they put Clara's plan into action. They hosted a Thanksgiving dinner for all the families with children in the school, turning the big empty dining room into a space filled with laughter and food. Clara organized a Christmas pageant, with the students performing for parents and neighbors. The ranch became a gathering place, a center of community life in a way it had never been before. And slowly, something else changed too. The careful distance Ethan and Clara had maintained since their wedding began to erode. They'd sit closer together at the table. Their hands would brush when passing dishes. Conversations would stretch late into the night, covering everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. One evening in December, after a particularly long day, they found themselves sitting by the fireplace, watching the flames dance. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the prairie in white. "I never thought I'd be here," Clara said quietly. "On a ranch in Kansas, married to a man I met at a train station." "Regret it?" Ethan asked, though he was almost afraid of the answer. Clara was quiet for so long he thought she might not respond. Then she turned to look at him, the firelight catching in her gray eyes. "No," she said, "I don't regret it. Do you?" "Not for a second." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire, and Ethan felt Clara's hand find his. Her fingers laced through his, warm and certain, and he squeezed back. "We should probably talk about this," Clara said. "About what?" "About the fact that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a partnership." Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. "When do you think that happened?" "I don't know. Maybe during the storm. Maybe when we saved the ranch. Maybe it's been happening all along, too slowly for either of us to notice." Clara's voice was steady, but he could hear the vulnerability beneath it. "All I know is that when I think about the future now, you're in it. Not just as my business partner, but as my husband." Ethan turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. "I think I started falling for you the moment you refused to get off that wagon during the storm. You could have stayed safe in the house, but you chose to fight, and you've been fighting ever since, for this ranch, for those students, for us." "I'm not very good at giving up," Clara said with a small smile. "Neither am I." Ethan reached up and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Clara, I know this isn't how either of us planned our lives, but I can't imagine doing this with anyone else." Clara's eyes shimmered. "Neither can I." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But she didn't. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then it deepened, years of loneliness and fear giving way to something warmer, something that felt like hope. When they finally pulled apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. "Well?" she said breathlessly. "That was overdue." Ethan laughed, the sound surprised out of him. "Yeah, it was." They sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about everything and nothing. And when they finally climbed the stairs together, it was to the same room, the same bed, no longer partners in name only, but husband and wife in every sense that mattered. Winter settled over the ranch like a blanket, and with it came a peace Ethan hadn't known in years. The work didn't stop, it never did, but it felt different now. Lighter, somehow, despite the cold and the snow. Clara's school continued to thrive, even adding 3 more students after Christmas. The evening classes grew so popular that she had to split them into 2 sessions, and the ranch itself, though still recovering, was profitable for the first time in years. But the threat of Whitmore and his investors hung over them like a shadow. Ethan waited for the next move, knowing it would come eventually. It came in February, in the form of a letter from the county assessor's office. The property taxes on the ranch had been reassessed at nearly triple the previous amount, effective immediately. Payment was due within 30 days. Ethan stared at the letter in disbelief. "This can't be legal." Clara read over his shoulder, her face pale. "It's barely legal, but it's possible. They must have gotten someone on the assessor's board to change the valuation. We can't pay this. It's $1,500. Then we fight it." Clara's voice was hard. "We file an appeal, we get documentation proving the assessment is unfair, and we make them justify every penny." They spent the next 2 weeks gathering evidence, comparable property values, historical tax records, affidavits from neighbors about the true value of the land. Clara organized it all with the precision of a general planning a battle, and when they walked into the county office to file their appeal, They had a case built on solid ground. The clerk who took their paperwork looked uncomfortable. "This will take time to process." "How much time?" Clara asked. "Could be months." "We don't have months. The payment is due in 2 weeks." The clerk shrugged helplessly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly." They left the office frustrated but not defeated. That evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, her mind working through strategies. "We need public pressure," she said finally. "If we can get enough people to speak out against the reassessment, it'll be harder for them to ignore our appeal." "How do we do that?" Clara smiled, sharp and determined. "We use the school. Every family with a child here has a stake in keeping this ranch operational. If they lose the school, their children lose their education. We make sure they understand that." She was right. Over the next week, Clara spoke to every parent, explaining the situation and asking for their support. And one by one, they agreed to help. They wrote letters to the assessor's office. They spoke to their neighbors. They made noise. Tom Henderson went further. He organized a petition, gathering signatures from every rancher and farmer in a 20-mile radius, all of them stating that the reassessment was unfair and would set a dangerous precedent for the entire county. "This is good," Clara said, reading through the petition. "This is really good." "Think it'll be enough?" Ethan asked. "It has to be." They submitted the petition along with their formal appeal, and then they waited. The deadline for payment loomed closer, and Ethan found himself lying awake at night, calculating and recalculating, trying to find a way to come up with the money if the appeal failed. 3 days before the deadline, a writer came with a letter. Ethan's hands shook as he opened it. The appeal had been granted. The reassessment was being reviewed, and in the meantime, the original tax amount would stand. Ethan read the letter 3 times, hardly believing it. Then he grabbed Clara and spun her around, both of them laughing with relief. "We did it," Clara said, clutching the letter. "We actually did it." "You did it," Ethan corrected, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "None of this would have worked without you." Clara smiled up at him, her eyes bright. "Good thing you picked me up at that train station then. Best decision I ever made." They stood in the kitchen, holding each other, and Ethan realized that this was what he'd been missing all along. Not just a partner to help run the ranch, but someone to build a life with. Someone who fought beside him instead of behind him. Someone who made him better, just by being there. That night, after supper, Clara sat at the piano that had sat silent in the parlor for 3 years. She played softly at first, testing the keys, then with more confidence. Ethan stood in the doorway, listening to the music fill the house, and felt the last of his grief for Sarah lift away. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but finally at peace. Clara looked up and caught him watching. "Come sit with me." He crossed the room and sat beside her on the bench, their shoulders touching. Clara continued to play, a simple melody that sounded like hope, and Ethan put his arm around her waist. "I love you," he said quietly. Clara's hands stilled on the keys. She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Say that again." "I love you, Clara Cole." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she smiled through them. "I love you too. I think I have for a while now." They kissed there at the piano, surrounded by music and firelight and the life they'd built together from nothing but determination and trust. And outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under a sky full of stars, waiting for spring. Spring arrived early that year, melting the snow and turning the prairie green almost overnight. The transformation felt symbolic, as if the land itself was acknowledging the new life taking root on the Double Creek Ranch. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, the other holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She was pregnant. The realization had come 2 weeks ago, confirmed by old Mrs. Henderson, who'd birthed half the babies in the county and could tell just by looking at a woman's face. Clara hadn't told Ethan yet. She was still wrapping her mind around it herself, the idea that after everything they'd built together, they were about to build something else entirely. "You're up early," Ethan said from the doorway, his voice still rough with sleep. Clara turned and smiled. He stood there in his undershirt and work pants, his hair sticking up in directions that made him look younger than his years. She loved him like this, unguarded and rumpled, before the day's work hardened him back into the stoic rancher everyone else saw. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Too much on my mind." Ethan crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. Anything I should worry about? No, actually, it's something good. Clara set down her coffee cup and turned in his arms. But I think we should wait until after breakfast to discuss it. I have a feeling it's going to be a long conversation. Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't press. That was one of the things she'd come to appreciate about him. He trusted her to share things in her own time. All right, I'll get the stove going. They worked together to prepare breakfast, moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who'd shared the same space for months. Ethan fried eggs and bacon while Clara made biscuits from scratch, and by the time they sat down to eat, the kitchen was filled with morning light and the smell of food. Clara waited until Ethan had finished his first cup of coffee before speaking. I'm pregnant. Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, his eyes widening. You're sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. Mrs. Henderson confirmed it, and she's rarely wrong about these things. Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Then he seemed to realize he didn't know what to do with himself and sat back down, his hands trembling slightly. A baby. We're going to have a baby. Yes. Clara watched his face, trying to read the emotions flickering across it. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Scared, happy, terrified. He laughed, the sound shaky. When Sarah and I were married, we tried for years. She wanted children so badly, and it just never happened. I thought maybe I couldn't. He trailed off, his eyes glistening. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. This is our fresh start, Ethan. All of it. The ranch, the school, and now this. Ethan squeezed her hand so tight it almost hurt. When? October, I think. Maybe late September. He stood again and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. Clara felt his heart hammering against her cheek and realized he was crying, silent tears that he tried to hide by burying his face in her hair. I'm going to be a father, he whispered. You're going to be a wonderful father, Clara corrected, her own eyes burning with tears. They stood there in the kitchen for a long time, holding each other while the morning sun climbed higher and the world outside continued its endless turning. Finally, Ethan pulled back and cupped her face in his hands. We need to take better care of you. No more working yourself to exhaustion. No more lifting heavy things or... Ethan Cole, if you try to wrap me in cotton wool for the next 6 months, I will make your life miserable, Clara interrupted, but she was smiling. I'm pregnant, not fragile. Women have been doing this work for thousands of years. I know, but nothing. I'll be sensible, I promise. But I'm not stopping teaching, and I'm not stopping helping run this ranch. Clara softened her voice. We're in this together, remember? That doesn't change just because there's going to be 3 of us. Ethan nodded slowly, though Clara could see the worry in his eyes. Just promise me you'll tell me if anything feels wrong. If you're too tired, if you need to rest, anything. I promise. The news spread through the community faster than Clara expected. Apparently, Mrs. Henderson had a loose tongue when it came to happy gossip, and within a week, every family with children in the school knew about the baby. They brought gifts, hand-knitted blankets, carved wooden toys, jars of preserves to help Clara through the pregnancy. The generosity overwhelmed her, this outpouring of care from people who'd been strangers less than a year ago. This is what community means, Tom Henderson said when he and his wife brought over a beautiful cradle he'd built himself. We take care of our own. But not everyone was happy about the ranch's growing success and integration into the community. In early April, Richard Whitmore returned, this time with 2 other men who looked less like businessmen and more like the kind of people you hired when legal methods failed. Ethan was in the barn when they rode up, and he walked out to meet them with his rifle held loosely at his side. Not a threat exactly, but not an invitation either. Mr. Cole, Whitmore said, his polished smile firmly in place, I hope you've had time to reconsider our offer. Already told you, ranch isn't for sale. Yes, I remember, but circumstances change. Whitmore gestured to the 2 men flanking him. These are my associates, Mr. Dawson and Mr. Reed. They're here to make one final offer on behalf of my clients. $15,000 paid in cash with a generous timeline for you to relocate. And if I refuse? Whitmore's smile thinned. then my clients will be forced to pursue other options. You see, they've already purchased the surrounding properties. The Henderson Ranch to the north, the Porter Place to the east, and Mrs. Sullivan's land to the west. Your little ranch is now an island in the middle of their holdings, and that's very inconvenient for their development plans. Ethan felt ice slide down his spine. You're lying. Tom Henderson would never sell. Wouldn't he? When offered enough money to move his family somewhere with better schools and more opportunities for his daughters? Whitmore pulled papers from his saddlebag. All signed and legal. You can verify it yourself if you don't believe me. The barn door opened behind Ethan, and Clara stepped out, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. What's going on? Mrs. Cole, Whitmore said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Congratulations on your impending addition. All the more reason to accept our offer, I'd think. $15,000 would set your family up quite comfortably in a nice town somewhere. Clara's eyes narrowed. We're not interested in your money. Then you're fools. The politeness dropped from Whitmore's voice like a mask. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You're surrounded. Every ranch that borders yours now belongs to my clients. They control the access roads, the water rights, the grazing permits. They can make it impossible for you to operate. We have our own well, Ethan said, his grip tightening on the rifle. For now. But water rights can be challenged, and accidents happen. Fences get cut, cattle wander onto property where they're not supposed to be, buildings catch fire. Whitmore leaned forward in his saddle. You've built something admirable here, Mr. Cole. It would be a shame to watch it all burn down because you were too stubborn to accept a generous offer. Clara stepped forward, and Ethan saw the schoolteacher in her, the woman who'd faced down unruly students and difficult parents with nothing but force of will. Are you threatening us, Mr. Whitmore? I'm warning you, there's a difference. No, there isn't. Clara's voice was ice. You ride onto our property with armed men, tell us you've cornered us, and threaten our livelihood unless we sell. That's not a warning, that's extortion. Dawson, the larger of the two enforcers, spoke for the first time. Careful with your accusations, ma'am. Or what? Clara didn't flinch. You'll add assault to your list of crimes? This is still our land, gentlemen, and you're trespassing. I suggest you leave before my husband decides to exercise his legal right to defend his property. Ethan raised the rifle slightly, making the threat explicit. You heard my wife. Whitmore's face flushed with anger, but he pulled his horse back. You're making a mistake. My clients always get what they want, one way or another. Then they're going to be disappointed for the first time, Clara said. The three men rode off, and Ethan lowered the rifle with shaking hands. Do you think he was telling the truth about the other ranches? Only one way to find out. Clara was already walking toward the house. I'm writing to the Hendersons. Clara, you can't. I can and I will. I need to know if Tom really sold. She paused at the porch steps. Coming with me? They rode together to the Henderson Ranch, and Ethan's heart sank when he saw the changes. A surveyor's crew was marking out property lines, and Tom Henderson stood in his yard looking older than Ethan had ever seen him. It's true then, Ethan said, dismounting. Tom wouldn't meet his eyes. They offered me $20,000, Ethan, $20,000. That's enough to buy a house in town, send my girls to a real school, maybe even send them to college someday. You could have told me they were pressuring you. They weren't pressuring, they made an offer, and I took it. Tom finally looked up, and Ethan saw the guilt there. I've been ranching for 30 years, and I've got nothing to show for it but debt and broken down equipment. This was my chance to give my family something better. Clara spoke gently. When do you leave? End of the month. They're giving us time to pack and find a place in Topeka. Tom's voice cracked. I'm sorry, Ethan. I know this puts you in a bad spot. They left soon after, and the visit to the Porter Place and Mrs. Sullivan's property confirmed the same story. Everyone had sold. The Double Creek Ranch was indeed an island, surrounded on all sides by hostile territory. That night, Clara and Ethan sat at the kitchen table, trying to figure out their options. The ledger was open in front of them, showing their finances. They were profitable now, yes, but barely. They didn't have the capital to fight a prolonged legal battle or to withstand the kind of harassment Whitmore had threatened. We could sell, Ethan said quietly. Take the money. Buy a place somewhere else. Start over. Clara looked at him sharply. Is that what you want? No, but I want you and the baby safe more. Ethan ran his hands through his hair. If they start making good on their threats, cutting fences, interfering with water, causing accidents, I don't know if I can protect you. So we give up? We let them win. Clara's voice rose. After everything we've fought for, we just hand it over because they made threats? I'm trying to be practical. No, you're trying to protect me again, and I don't need protecting. Clara stood, pacing the kitchen. I didn't marry you so you could make all the hard decisions by yourself. We're partners, Ethan. Equal partners. And I say we fight. With what? We don't have their resources, their connections, their money. We have something better. We have the community. Clara stopped pacing and looked at him. Every family with a child in my school has a stake in keeping us here. The people who come to evening classes, the neighbors who helped during the storm, the merchants in town who depend on our business, they all benefit from this ranch staying operational. That didn't stop Tom and the others from selling, because they were offered money for property that was already struggling. But we're not struggling anymore. We're profitable. We're important to this community. Clara sat back down and took his hands. We organize. We make noise. We show Whitmore's clients that forcing us out will cost them more in goodwill and local support than they'll gain in land. Ethan wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. And if that doesn't work, then we fight harder. Clara's grip tightened. I'm not losing this place, Ethan. This is our home. This is where our child is going to grow up, and I'll be damned if I let some railroad investors take that away from us. Looking into her eyes, fierce and uncompromising, Ethan felt his resolve harden. She was right. They'd come too far, fought too hard to give up now. All right, he said. We fight. Tell me what you need me to do. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara orchestrated a campaign that would have impressed a military general. She called meetings with every family connected to the school, explaining the situation and asking for their support. She wrote letters to the territorial governor's office, documenting Whitmore's threats and requesting an investigation. She contacted newspapers in Topeka and Kansas City, offering them a story about a small ranch fighting against corporate land grabs. And she organized a petition, not just signatures this time, but sworn statements from dozens of community members attesting to the ranch's value to the region. Teachers who'd learned to read in her evening classes, children whose education depended on the school, merchants whose businesses benefited from the ranch's commerce. Even the Reverend signed, noting that the ranch had become a gathering place for community worship and celebration. Ethan worked a different angle. He rode to every neighboring ranch that hadn't sold yet, warning them about Whitmore's tactics and encouraging them to band together. Some were interested, others were wary. But slowly, a coalition began to form. Ranchers who realized that if the Double Creek fell, they'd be next. The response from the governor's office came in late May, just as the spring planting was finishing. A territorial marshal would be sent to investigate the allegations of intimidation and harassment. Whitmore's clients would need to demonstrate that their land acquisition methods were legal and above board. It wasn't a victory exactly, but it was something. A delay. A chance to build their case. Then, in early June, everything changed. Ethan was repairing fence when he saw smoke rising from the direction of the barn. He dropped his tools and ran, his heart in his throat, and found Clara already there with a bucket, trying to douse flames that were spreading across the hay storage. Get back, Ethan shouted, grabbing the bucket from her. You shouldn't be near this. The horses are still inside. She was right. Ethan could hear them screaming, panicked by the smoke. He handed Clara the bucket and ran into the burning barn, smoke searing his lungs. The horses were kicking at their stalls, eyes rolling with fear. Ethan opened the gates one by one, driving the animals out into the yard, coughing so hard he could barely breathe. The last horse out was Gracie, Clara's mare. Ethan slapped her flank and sent her running, then staggered out of the barn just as part of the roof collapsed behind him. Clara was there immediately, supporting him while he coughed up black soot. Are you all right? Fine. The horses? All safe. Clara looked at the burning barn, her face grim. This wasn't an accident. She was right. Ethan had checked that barn just that morning, and there'd been no sign of fire danger. This was Whitmore making good on his threat, showing them what would happen if they continued to resist. The barn burned to the ground, taking with it tools, equipment, and a season's worth of stored hay. The financial loss was devastating, but the message was clear: give up or lose everything. That night, with the acrid smell of smoke still hanging in the air, Ethan sat on the porch steps and seriously considered taking Whitmore's offer. The barn could be rebuilt, yes, but what if next time it was the house? What if Clara or the baby got hurt? Clara sat down beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. I know what you're thinking. Do you? You're thinking we should sell, that it's not worth the risk. She was quiet for a moment. And maybe you're right. Maybe the smart thing to do is take the money and go. Ethan turned to look at her, surprised. You've changed your mind? No, but I understand if you have. Clara looked out at the darkened prairie. I've been asking myself what I'm really fighting for. Is it the land itself, the house? No, it's the life we've built here. The school, the community, the future we're creating for our child. And I realized something: we can rebuild all of that anywhere. But I don't want to. Clara's voice strengthened. I don't want to teach our child that when bullies threaten you, you run. I don't want them to grow up thinking that money and intimidation always win. I want them to know that sometimes you have to stand and fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. He'd been so focused on protecting Clara and the baby that he'd forgotten the lesson they'd already learned together, that running from hard things never made them easier. You're right, he said quietly. I know. Clara squeezed his hand. So what do? We rebuild the barn. We document everything about the fire for the marshal's investigation, and we don't back down. The territorial marshal arrived 2 weeks later, a weathered man named Samuel Cross, who'd spent 30 years enforcing law in territories where law was more suggestion than reality. He interviewed Ethan and Clara, examined the burned barn, and spoke with neighbors who'd seen suspicious riders near the property the day of the fire. Then he paid a visit to Whitmore's investors in Topeka. Ethan didn't know exactly what happened in that meeting, but the results were clear. Within a week, Whitmore appeared at the ranch again, this time alone and noticeably less confident. My clients have decided to withdraw their offer, he said stiffly, sitting across from Ethan and Clara in the parlor. The marshal made it clear that any further incidents would result in criminal charges. Good, Clara said flatly. However, they're still interested in developing the surrounding land. Your ranch will be completely surrounded by their holdings. That will create certain complications for your operations. We'll manage, Ethan said. Whitmore stood, his expression sour. You've made powerful enemies, Mr. Cole. That rarely ends well. Neither does threatening pregnant women, Clara replied. You can show yourself out. After Whitmore left, Ethan and Clara sat in silence for a long moment. Then Ethan started to laugh, deep, relieved laughter that came from somewhere in his chest. We did it, he said. We actually did it. Clara smiled, but her expression was thoughtful. For now. But he's right about one thing. Being surrounded by their land is going to make things difficult. We'll figure it out. We always do. They did figure it out, though it took time and creativity. They negotiated easement agreements for road access. They developed relationships with the new property managers who moved into the surrounding ranches, finding common ground where they could. And they continued to deepen their roots in the community, making the Double Creek Ranch indispensable in ways that had nothing to do with property values or development potential. The school grew to 15 students by fall. Claire's evening classes were so popular she had to turn people away. And when she went into labor on a cool October evening, half the county seemed to show up to wait outside the house, bringing food and good wishes. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan thought he might lose his mind from helplessness. He paced the parlor while Mrs. Henderson and the doctor worked upstairs, listening to Clara's muffled cries and hating that there was nothing he could do to help. Finally, just before dawn, he heard a different sound, a thin, reedy wail that made his heart stop. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling wide. You have a daughter, Mr. Cole, and she's got quite a set of lungs on her. Ethan took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom to find Clara propped up against pillows, exhausted and pale but smiling. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced creature wrapped in blankets, wailing her displeasure at being born. "Say hello to your daughter," Clara said softly. Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at this impossibly small person who was somehow his. The baby had Clara's dark hair and a scrunched-up face that made her look permanently annoyed. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's loud," Clara corrected, but her eyes were full of love. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months, but now, looking at his daughter, Ethan knew exactly what felt right. "Hope. I want to name her Hope." Clara's eyes glistened with tears. "Hope Cole. I like that." They sat together as the sun rose, their daughter cradled between them, and Ethan thought about how far they'd come. A year ago, he'd been a broken man watching his life crumble. Clara had been a stranded woman with nowhere to go. And now they were here, a family bound not just by vows made in desperation, but by love hard-earned through shared struggle. The year that followed was the best of Ethan's life. Hope grew from a squalling infant into a curious baby who wanted to touch everything and taste even more. The ranch continued to prosper, with good cattle prices and a bumper wheat crop that paid off the last of their debts. Clara's school became officially recognized by the Territorial Education Board, bringing in additional funding and allowing her to hire an assistant teacher. And through it all, Ethan and Clara grew closer, their partnership deepening into a love that felt as solid and permanent as the prairie itself. One September afternoon, almost exactly a year after their crisis with the investors, Ethan suggested they take a ride together. Clara arranged for Mrs. Henderson to watch Hope, and they saddled up, Clara on Gracie, Ethan on his gelding, and rode toward town. "Where are we going?" Clara asked. "You'll see." He led her to the train station where they'd first met, pulling the horses to a stop in front of the same weathered platform. The station looked unchanged, same peeling paint, same crooked sign, same bench where Clara had sat waiting for a future that would never come. They dismounted and stood on the platform together, looking at the empty tracks stretching toward the horizon. "Why did you bring me here?" Clara asked. Ethan took her hand. "Because this is where it started, where we took a chance on each other when we had nothing left to lose." He turned to face her. "I wanted to come back and remember what that felt like. The fear, the desperation, the impossibility of it all." "It was terrifying," Clara said softly. "It was. But it was also the bravest thing either of us ever did." Ethan pulled her close. "I look at our life now, the ranch, the school, Hope, everything we've built, and I still can't quite believe it's real. The two strangers could meet on a train platform and somehow create all of this." Clara rested her head against his chest. "It's real because we made it real. We chose each other, and then we chose each other again every single day after that. Through storms and fires and threats and exhaustion, we kept choosing." "And I'd choose you again," Ethan said. "Every time in every timeline, I'd choose you." Clara looked up at him, her gray eyes bright with tears. "Even knowing how hard it would be?" "Especially knowing how hard it would be, because the hard parts are what made us who we are." He kissed her forehead. "Besides, someone very wise once told me that the bravest decisions often begin on the worst days." Clara laughed. "I don't remember saying that." "You lived it. That's better." They stood on the platform for a while longer, watching the afternoon light turn golden across the prairie. The train would come eventually, bringing new passengers, new stories, new possibilities. But Ethan and Clara's story was already written, not in desperation or convenience, but in courage, commitment, and a love that had been tested and proven true. As they rode back toward the ranch, Ethan looked over at Clara and saw her smiling, her face turned toward the wind, looking more at peace than he'd ever seen her. The woman who'd been deemed too old, too plain, too unmarketable for marriage. The woman who'd bet everything on a stranger with a failing ranch and a broken heart. She'd saved him. And in saving him, she'd saved herself. The Double Creek Ranch came into view as the sun began to set, the house and new barn solid against the prairie sky. Smoke rose from the chimney, cattle grazed in green pastures, and somewhere inside Hope was probably making Mrs. Henderson's life interesting. It looked like home. It felt like home. And as Ethan and Clara rode through the gate together, side by side, the way they'd faced everything else, he realized that this was what winning looked like. Not money or success or triumph over enemies, though they'd had some of that too. Winning was coming home to the person who'd stood beside you when standing was the hardest thing to do. It was building a life from nothing but trust and determination. It was choosing love not once, in a moment of passion, but repeatedly, in 1,000 small moments when giving up would have been easier. They'd started with nothing but desperation and a handshake. They'd built everything that mattered, and they'd done it together.